So Reverend Hannah had a great idea that it's probably good for me to go next since I'm another national staff person. So he was thinking about this and making this all work together. So my name is Amanda Kraft, and I work in the Office of Immigration Issues, which is in fact located in the Office of the General Assembly. So my work and all that I get to do on behalf of the denomination is supported by per capita funds. So I want to thank you for that work and that tithing that you do to give to that work. We endeavor to do this in collaboration with mid-councils and with congregations, and it's an honor to be able to do that, so thank you. The Presbyterian Church USA, well actually her antecedents, made its first policy statement on immigration in 1893.
Oh, wow.
1893. And that was to speak out against the Chinese Exclusion Act. And it was in concern and brought to the national denomination at that point because local congregations were working with Chinese immigrants. They had lots of missions with Chinese immigrants and were really concerned about what this measure would mean to those people who they have learned to love and who are part of their family. So we have a rich history of what it means to be present with those who might be newcomers in this country or those who have been in this country for a really long time but were born somewhere else, but who are integral parts of our community. And we've done that in different ways. But my work is really guided by policy, so I want to highlight a few things because I know it's helpful for Presbyterians when we start to talk about issues that may make us a little uncomfortable and not quite sure how to dive in. Policy is a good place to start. So in the 1940s, World War II, one of the largest refugee crises the world had witnessed up to that point, the Presbyterian Church became heavily involved in assistance to refugees, called on the government to welcome more than 100,000 people into this country, and asking churches and members to open their houses of worship and their own homes to receive people. And I find that very interesting. We are now in another crisis. We have over 68 million people who are forcibly removed and living displaced in this world. Of those, about 26 million would be considered refugees who are looking for safe housing, safe place to come to. And this country has issued its lowest refugee admissions cap in the history of the refugee admissions program. We are down to, my gosh, the number just slipped my mind. I'm going to say 18,000? 18,000. Wow. So again, to be reflected, this is a history, and the Presbyterian Church, especially Presbyterian women, was heavily involved in refugee resettlement work prior to the creation of the refugee program in the national federal system. In our government, which was in the 1980s when that was established, that program. So Presbyterians have a long history of welcoming refugees into this country. In the 1980s, if anyone can guess maybe what we were up to, the sanctuary movement. Presbyterians were in the forefront of the sanctuary movement. As our government was struggling to, we made this huge step in creating this refugee refugee admissions program, and we struggled with what to do with our neighbors in Central America who were involved in armed conflict. And what would we do when people arrived at our border? And not so different than what we're seeing today, we didn't want to let them in. And so it became imperative to a particular pastor in Arizona and his Mennonite buddy to start figuring out how to welcome people into the congregation. And that's where, thanks be to God for Reverend John Fife and Southside Presbyterian Church, the sanctuary movement sort of gained interest again in the United States. And that was an extremely important ministry that lots of Presbyterians participated in around the country. I know that Southside got a lot of interest because of what happened and how they were doing what they were doing, but a lot of congregations opened their doors to people who unfortunately couldn't seek refuge in the United States, but were on their way to Canada to find refuge. In the 1990s, opened up a space for vast changes in our immigration law, and there was a huge push for enforcement and detention. This is where detention becomes a big piece of how we deal with folks in our communities. And the Presbyterian Church, again, opened up statements and encouraged Presbyterians to be involved in how do we question how immigration enforcement happens in this country? How do we walk with people who are living with us and who we love? How do we seek ways in which enforcement doesn't give up the ability to care for those in our midst? And also, we're really seeking pathways for folks who are here without status to gain status. That was a huge push for us in the 90s and 2000s. And then in 2014, we hit another important point on our southern border where there was a shift in who we saw coming to our southern border who was asking for protection. And we saw a shift and an increase. Now, this is not an influx, it's not a wave, I want to be very honest. I lived on the border for a long time. But it was a shift in who was arriving, and we started seeing family units arriving at our border seeking protection. And I want to be honest with you, doesn't matter what your political affiliation may be, neither administration has been great on how we receive and welcome people in this country. And it was the Obama administration that started the policy of detaining families. And out of that, we see where we are today. The one big shift, and again, Presbyterians came out on that one, encouraging family unity, encouraging dignity of people who are at our borders asking for help. And there was a real understanding in a lot of people in this country is that we utilize immigration enforcement in ways that make us comfortable. And this has been particularly true throughout our history. Again, it doesn't matter political affiliation. If you go back to the Clinton administration, that's where the language of building a wall started. And we have spent billions on that process since. So we have utilized enforcement either in who we let in because we value and need the bodies of those who we let in, and then we make decisions about why they are no longer welcome. And the Presbyterian Church has really been committed to seeing the humanity and dignity of each person, and really committed to maintaining family unity in the midst of that. Understanding that people come into this country, and oftentimes there are so few ways you can actually access immigration benefits in this country. It is so difficult, and it's so easy to fall out of status. The Presbyterian Church has been really aware of that and understanding that you are not defined by your status. You're defined as a child of God, and that's who we see first in front of us. And so how do we care for those who are in our midst? The Presbyterian Church has been continuing to encourage folks to work with those who are the most vulnerable, to understand that that is our key goal in enforcement, not about keeping people out, but allowing people in who really do need protection. Have been heavily involved in work with dreamers, those who were young people who were brought to this country and are now without status in this country. We are accompanying currently those who are DACA recipients and who the Supreme Court will decide the fate of that program in June. And we have consistently said it's important that people have access to due process. And I want to make that my last point before I hand over to the next person. The big shift with this administration is the criminalization of people asking for help.
How could that be a crime?
We have an asylum system that is set up to allow people to step foot in this country and ask for safety and not be criminalized. And so it's really important that we continue to look forward to ways that we can work together to ensure that laws that we have set up for the most vulnerable are upheld. The world looked at these asylum laws, and lots of countries around the world followed those asylum laws because they felt they were so important. And for those of us who read the news and see the images, realize that we're in a crisis. And it's not a crisis of how many people are arriving at our border because it's some of the lowest numbers we've had historically. That's not the issue. The issue is how do we welcome those who are fleeing violence, who are fleeing situations where they can't live with dignity, they can't live fully as who they're called to be. And our office helps churches figure out how to respond in that way. And we do that in collaboration. We do that in collaboration with the Office of Public Witness as we encourage people to be advocates. Federal law is who makes up immigration law, so figuring out how to work with your Congress. Members of Congress is really important to make that change. We work with Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, who has a mandate to work with refugees and assignees. So they're often able to work with congregations and provide funding to do on-the-ground kind of work in receiving and accompanying. We do a lot of work of advocating for personal people who are in detention and how do we walk with them, how do we keep people from being detained. So it's a lot of different kinds of work, but it's always focused on who is that individual before us, understanding that they are a child of God and we are called to accompany them. And to do that in a way that hopefully will bring us joy in the midst of what is a really difficult problem at this point. I do want to highlight one piece. I had the opportunity in 2018 to be with a congregation in New Hampshire. And this congregation is about 250 people. It's a really strong congregation in Presbyterian land. And the majority of them are from Indonesia. Half of that congregation is undocumented. And so we have to realize that at any point, vast numbers of our members could be removed. And what does that mean to us as Presbyterians? And so I think to be constantly aware that this isn't a problem that is just off to the side and we don't necessarily have to think about it, but it's people who grew up out of our mission presence around the world who are here in the United States. And it's so interesting to talk with them because we're like, oh, why would you be Presbyterian? There are so many other options. And they said, why would we be anything else? And so there's a real commitment to who this church is. And I will say too, the work that we do, although there's only two of us in the office, when we're connecting with these congregations and individuals, it's like this light goes off and realizing how the connectional church works. And this is a real opportunity for the councils to see how we live with one another, how we walk with one another, and the importance of that. So, thank you.